So guys, today in politics, I guess we bagged what you could call a double header. The opposition leader, Mark Speakman, and the Premier, no less, Chris Minns, teamed up to take me out. And that's today on the Dr. Joe Show. So before we get into the show today, could I please ask you to subscribe to our channel if you are new here? It really helps to get those subscriptions up because we can grow our movement and reach more people. So it's been a massive day. I'm not in my usual location in Adelaide, which you can probably tell. We are at an Airbnb in Ballina-Byron because the kids are competing in a national rock climbing competition. But it's been a huge day because there's lots of things to discuss and unpack in today's show. So I thought I'd quickly jump in here and film for you guys while the dinner's in the oven. So we've got to keep it pretty short today. All right, let's dive in. Big headline news. The bill has passed. The Radical Greens bill passed the lower house 65-20. While that's devastating, I want to point out at the outset that this is actually a huge victory for us, what we've managed to achieve. Check out this post by Amanda Conn that she's just put up. And the photo of who's beside her says it all. So on one side, she's flanked by Ryan Park, the Labor Health Minister. On the other side is Kelly Sloan, the Liberal Shadow Health Minister. So what you see there right up front is both the major parties have these strongly pro-abortion elements and institutionally they're supporting her. And when you hear that vote today, 65-20 in the lower house, it speaks to the fact that this parliament is stacked with pro-abortion MPs. And so the fact that we gutted this bill that everybody thought would sail through both houses of parliament unamended is an incredible victory for the people of New South Wales, for us, and what we've managed to do because they introduced this bill. Ryan Park and Conn and Sloan had all been working closely together. They assumed it would sail through. And we got in and ran our big rally on March 25, delaying the debate by 1 week. And then as a result, this debate has now dragged on till May 14. We had a second rally with 10,000 people then, and the mainstream media didn't help us at all. They refused to cover it, refused to talk about the rallies. But through social media and through word of mouth, through all of you guys calling, emailing, turning up, rocking up to the letterboxes relentlessly, you know, we together have managed to gut this bill. It was a bill that would force public hospitals to potentially perform abortions because the Minister for Health had a new power and he could order them to perform abortions and they must comply. It was a bill that said that doctors had to actively transfer their patient to someone who would kill the baby, so making doctors morally complicit in abortion. It was a bill that removed data keeping requirements around abortion. So an extremely radical bill that hadn't been attempted anywhere else in the world, and it was going to sail through the parliament but for us. So I'm enormously proud of what we've managed to achieve together, gutting this bill out of 3 out of the 4 elements and even getting in one of our own amendments to enhance the data keeping requirements, to introduce an annual report that has to be publicly available that actually speaks to the adverse events when women get abortions and to get us the numbers on abortions. These are things we just don't have readily available at the moment. And we managed to get that amendment through Robert Borsak from the Shooters Fishers Party. So, you know, I really think we hijacked this debate and they're furious. And, you know, what happens when they're furious? Well, like toddlers, they act out. And that's indeed what Mark Speakman and Chris Minns have done today. Before we get into that crazy story, I just want to break down the numbers a little bit for you guys because at the outset, we made a decision that we were going to target Labor and target Minns. And the reason we did that is because even though all of the parties were giving this a conscience vote, all of the major parties, I wanted to be really clear with people that Labor is the party of abortion. And I don't think that pro-life and Christian groups have been explicit about that before. And the ferocity of our campaign against Labor really took them by surprise because Labor loves to do this big dance, as I've been telling you guys, where they court religious leaders and faith communities and they have all these little sit-down chats. But ultimately, they stab us in the back in the one thing that we need them to do, which is to govern responsibly in the interests of people of faith and people in the community. What Labor does is they govern in the interests of the agenda of the radical left, and that's something we've been exposing. And so right up front at the beginning, we said Labor's the party of government, Minns is the Premier, he could block this bill, like Jacinta Allen, his counterpart, did in Victoria when she blocked a Radical Greens bill earlier in the year. And so we said Minns must act, and that was the premise of the campaign. And some people criticised it and said, well, why aren't you going after the Libs? Why aren't you going after the other parties? This is a conscience vote. But I really wanted to educate people that when we're talking about extremism on abortion, we're talking about the Greens and Labor and their lockstep. So let's just have a look at the numbers of how this vote panned out. So across both houses in Labor, 48 MPs voted for the bill and only 7 voted against. So when a conscience vote plays out, the overwhelming majority of Labor MPs, indeed 48, with only 7 against, will vote for abortion every time. And then in the Liberal Party, there were only 13 that voted for the bill and 17 against. So you can see it's more even-handed there, but even there, you've got more voting against the bill. The other thing you note with all of that is Labor had the numbers to block this bill. Our only way of ever winning on this was to convince Labor that the heat and the spotlight was on them. Because if we'd gone after everyone, we would have had a very broad target, much harder then to really hold them to account because, you just got to campaign against each individual MP. And what we strategically did, which really disrupted kind of what they thought we would do, was we went after Labor and we said, your government, you're the ones who should govern in the best interests of New South Wales. You're not doing that by allowing this bill to pass, by allowing this bill to be debated. And, I think where we were enormously successful was by putting that heat on Labor. We saw extraordinary scenes in the upper house where Penny Sharp and Rose Jackson, 2 of the most pro-abortion MPs in the Labor Party, were actually on opposite sides of this debate last week in the upper house. Penny Sharp was giving speeches nobody thought she would give on the side of gutting this bill, whereas Rose Jackson, who's just as militant as Penny on abortion, and up until this point they've been one in mind and spirit, she was on the opposite side voting against these amendments to gut the bill. And I think that's where you see the success of our campaign, what we managed to make Labor do against their will. Now, all of this to say, it is devastating that the bill has passed, even in its gutted form, because it does, in my view, really lead to an expansion of abortion. It's turning a new class of health worker into abortionists by allowing nurses and midwives to prescribe abortion pills. It's putting women's safety at risk because these have a 6.6% complication rate, and it will lead to more babies being killed. So all of that is really devastating, but there is this silver lining of what we've managed to achieve and defy expectations on. So I woke up this morning to the headline in the Sydney Morning Herald of Mark Speakman accusing me of brazen bullying. Let's take a look at what he said.
Dr. Joanna Howe emailed me last night describing herself as, quote, the lead advocate against the bill, unquote. She wrote, quote, should Premier Minns vote for the bill and enable its passage, I will be leading a 20-month campaign across 5 marginal seats that are currently Labor-held but are also in socially conservative electorates, unquote. But then, to my shock, she then threatened, quote, however, if you choose to vote for the bill, I will be left with no other choice but to suspend my planned campaign against Labor in order to lead a public campaign aimed at encouraging a grassroots opposition to you as Liberal leader, unquote. I won't cave in to brazen bullying like this, nor to the Americanisation of New South Wales politics.
So, guys, we've seen this before because when I introduced the Labor bill in South Australia last year, working with some politicians, the exact same thing happens where these politicians that want to take me out, they get up in Parliament under the cover of parliamentary privilege, which means that I can't sue them for anything that they say. They can say anything about me, the most brazen lies, and there's literally nothing I can do, and there's no recourse. And, I think what happens is they work with their comrades in the media in advance. So, Speakman and his allies have been speaking with their journalists and leaked this in advance. And then the media can repeat the things that they say in Parliament under parliamentary privilege verbatim and take me out in the public domain and get it out to an even bigger audience because no one's watching Speakman at, 6 p.m. on a Tuesday night. But people are reading The Guardian, the ABC, the SMH, and this is how it works. This is how they control the narrative. But now let's get to what he actually says because it's just really pathetic. It's spineless, lame. Like, what the heck? He gets up in Parliament and says, I will not be bullied, about the fact that I wrote him an email where I said, I'm the lead advocate in the campaign against the bill, which is true. I've led 2 rallies and run letterboxes and, led a team of people who don't want this bill, don't want it to have anything to do with New South Wales. And so he reads that email where I say to him, look, I'm planning to go after Labor, but I've just heard that you may be thinking about voting for this bill, which honestly just blew my mind when I read that in the Sydney Morning Herald. I just couldn't believe that he would be thinking about that, partly because he'd actually said, I'm not voting for this bill. He'd said that, committed it publicly. And so I wrote to him out of courtesy to say, look, if you vote for the bill, I'm going to have to campaign against you. I'm going to have to pause the Labor campaign because this would just be such an egregious breach of trust and faith amongst the people of New South Wales, particularly Liberal voters and your base, and I would have to make it my mission to let people know what you did and to hold you to account. Now, that's just democracy, right? Like, that's just actually me being courteous. Instead of stabbing him in the back later and sucking up to him beforehand, I was just really honest about it. I said, look, this is what I'm going to do to you. And we don't live in China or Russia where, presumably it is illegal to write an email to an MP telling them what you're going to do and to say that sort of thing. Presumably that's not okay in an authoritarian state. But in a democracy, what other power do we, the people, have other than to write emails to MPs telling them, I urge you to vote or not vote for this bill, and if you do or don't, this is what I'm going to do. Like, that surely is democracy in action. The fact that Mark Speakman gets up in Parliament with this faux kind of strength and says, I will not be cowed by bullies, when I'm like this 5-foot petite lady who literally has no power and privilege at all compared to him. He's an elected representative paid over $200,000 by us to stand in Parliament to represent us. This is a representative democracy. And I'm just one citizen who over the last 2.5 years has run a public advocacy campaign against all of the odds and all of the intimidation and all of the gatekeeping and all of the accusations and investigations and attempts to get me cancelled. And I'm the one that's the bully somehow, just because I want to use my voice, and I'm telling him that I'm going to do that. It just is insane. But then, you get the headlines in the paper, you get the news stories, and you see what they're trying to do. They're just trying to shut me down. And the funny thing is, I think he's got some real gotcha moment there on me, like he's reading out this email that I wouldn't want him to read. I wrote the email knowing that there was a very good chance he would do this, but I didn't care because I'm going to do this. In voting for the bill, Mark Speakman, I'm going to do exactly what I said I would do in the email. In fact, I've been on the phone all day to various campaign outfits to go, how do we get rid of the Liberal Party, of these woke, toxic Liberals, with Speakman as our number one target? I said it in the email, we're going to carry it out together. And mark my words, this guy is not going to be Liberal leader for much longer. Now let's move on to Minns, because it didn't end there with Speakman, but Chris Minns fronted up to a press conference today, and once again, I became the topic of the conference. It's just quite remarkable, actually, to be in a situation as someone campaigning against abortion up to birth in this country and to be the subject of the opposition leader and the Premier's rage. It shows we've ruffled feathers. It shows we've actually been successful. In fact, you guys have been putting comments down saying you're clearly above the target, Joe, because they're coming for you. And that's actually really exciting to see that we are really getting to them in what we're doing. And that shows us that we're making progress, if we didn't see that already in the way that we managed to gut the bill. All right, let's watch what Chris Minns had to say.
Yeah, I have to say, in relation to that particular advocate, there's enormous amounts of misinformation and lies that have been spread by her on social media, and it's whipped up a lot of good people in the community believing that the reform changes, the legislative changes, are far more extensive than they in fact were.
So, first of all, that's just a crazy thing for him to say. He said, I whipped up people in the community to think these changes were far more extreme than what they in fact were. The Greens, with Labor's tacit support, behind the scenes, had introduced a bill that was literally the most extreme abortion bill anyone in the world has ever seen. Like, it gave the Minister for Health a power to order public hospitals to perform abortions, and those hospitals had to comply. It also trampled over the conscience rights of doctors. So for Minns to say that, I'm responsible for all this misinformation, whipping up this hysteria, people needed to be hysterical about this bill. This was an extreme, radical takeover of our country. I believed it could have been the beginning of the end of religious freedom, if they could do this. And we know that Labor and the Greens have formed. They took over a Catholic hospital in Canberra because it wouldn't perform abortions. And so this is clearly what was going to happen here. The Greens are on the record saying that all public hospital funding should be conditional upon abortion. Labor took that policy to the polls federally in 2019 and they lost dramatically. After that, they scrubbed it from the record, but it's clearly been part of their agenda. Let's see what he said next.
And I had a lot of constituents in my community coming and saying, for example, the provision that has remained for nurse practitioners to be able to distribute medication in line with TGA guidelines. The rumour that was circulating, I'm not saying it was necessarily spread by this activist, but it was certainly going around the community, was that they would be compelled to do it, and if they didn't do it, then their licence would be yanked, and that conscientious objection did not apply. I mean, that's clearly incorrect.
So Minns is being very clever here, isn't he? Casting aspersions and shade on me while stopping short of actually accusing me of something he knows very well I didn't do. I never said that nurses and midwives were going to lose their licence if they didn't perform abortions. But I've been concerned. I've been very upfront about this all along. I've been really concerned that nurses and midwives are going to be, in practice, compelled to participate in abortion through giving out abortion drugs. That is a legitimate fear that I've had. And I have that fear. It's well-founded because so many nurses and midwives and doctors as well, so lots of health workers, they've come to me and they've said the way, conscientious objection works in practice is you just have to be so bold and so dogged to turn around in the moment and say, I'm not going to do it. Because your employer is saying, we've got a shortage right now. There's a woman that's presented. I just need you to write the prescription for that drug, or I need you to do this. And in that moment, you as a health worker have to turn around and find the courage to say, I'm sorry, but I have an objection to participating in abortions. And the eye roll you're going to get, the attitude you're going to get. And I've shared on my social media and YouTube interviews I've had with nurses and midwives and doctors who have said that in the real world, this is something that they're in effect compelled to do. And so I knew that when this part of the bill made its way to the lower house, while everybody from Speakman to Minns was now saying, oh, well, we can vote for this. It's now become very reasonable and moderate. It's just about distributing medication, which is what Minns has just said. In reality, if you are a nurse or a midwife who believes that giving that abortion drug to a woman, RU486, is going to kill an innocent human child who has no voice, you don't want to do it, but you're going to be put in this impossible situation. Now, for the record, absolutely, we should be saying no, and we must object. You cannot become complicit in this. It does something to you, It's not good enough to say I was following orders. This was the thing that my hospital or my surgery, I have to do it. I work here. It's my workplace. In those moments, guys, we actually have to have the courage to turn around and say that we're not going to participate. But I know what that's like for you guys, and you guys have told me. And so, I have been clear that I do believe that this really erodes conscientious objection. It erodes the very role of a nurse and a midwife as people who came into midwifery and nursing to care for women and birth babies alive, and it turns them into killers. Let's see what he said next.
Particularly when you have a matter as sensitive as abortion, it's not helped by putting an enormous amount of misinformation into the debate. As for threatening politicians about what you will and won't do, well, that's a matter for activists, but generally speaking, Australian politicians, regardless of their background or ideology, react incredibly poorly to that kind of threat. And my experience, particularly in conscience votes, and this doesn't just apply to the Labor Party, is that people come to these issues, make a genuine decision about what's in the best interest of their community and make the call, and they'll usually resist that kind of bullying behaviour.
So note, Speakman used parliamentary privilege to call me a bully. I think Minns is getting carried away here because he doesn't have the cover of parliamentary privilege, and he's just called me a liar and a bully. I think this is something that, we're going to be able to take forward in terms of holding him to account. So watch this space. What I've said on social media straight away is he either needs to retract and then apologise, or I am going to have to take legal action because this is outrageous. Now, let's just unpack really quickly the bullying allegation again, because all I've ever done is exercise my democratic right to criticise the government, to campaign and to activate the people. That's what I'm doing. And so for him to call it threatening and bullying, that just shows he's as pathetic as Mark Speakman, doesn't it? It really just shows how fragile these snowflake politicians are, that they can't handle the heat. And they're not used to the heat on the issue of abortion. They're used to being able to hide behind this idea of a conscience vote, that they're just really noble and they're agonising over it. And they've actually got consciences, they want us to believe, guys. And they're saying to us it's really arduous to work out what to do. But look at what actually happens. This is a pro-abortion parliament. Minns voted for abortion up to birth. It's just the reality that these guys know what's going to happen before it even happens. This conscience vote is a done deal before it even happens. And you can see that the way all of the Labor members in the upper house, they went where Penny Sharp went, by and large. The vast majority of them, 48 Labor members across both houses, supported the bill, only 7 against. It's not really a conscience vote. Labor is the party of abortion, just like the Greens is. And of the 7 that voted against it from Labor, how many of those are really pro-life, and how many of those are just Labor MPs in deeply religious electorates that voted against same-sex marriage in droves? And they just know that to preserve their own hide and to still have a job in 2027, the very minimum they had to do was vote against this bill. The only people in Labor who genuinely spoke up for the babies were Courtney Husis, Greg Donnelly and Hugh McDermott. Those 3. The rest of the party, in my view, is hijacked by an abortion agenda, a radical abortion agenda that's out of step with the community. And what these guys don't like is that I've exposed it and called it out for the first time. The media's not doing this, we're doing it. Let's see what he said next.
Look, there's a difference between someone saying, I don't like what the government's doing, I don't like what an MP is doing, I'm going to campaign against them and I'm not going to vote for them at the next election. That's a healthy part of democracy and we shouldn't be criticising it. When you're saying that an individual MP has voted a certain way when that is clearly not the case, and I want to refer particularly to several members of Parliament, in this instance have a long voting history against abortion. It's always been a conscience vote in Labor, and have been told on social media that they've got the reverse position. That is deliberate misinformation, and I don't think I don't think Australia benefits for that kind of level of political discourse.
So that's just defamation, because I never misled anybody on voting records. I think what he's referring there to is the fact that I announced on social media that we were going to letterbox 10 Labor seats. And in that bunch, I didn't buy their BS and only go to the seats of people that voted for abortion up to birth in 2019. People like Chris Minns and Prue Card. No, we went to the seats where I knew it would hurt Labor the most, because they actually needed those seats to win government. And when I announced that 10 letterboxing campaign, oh my goodness, was Labor rattled. I received so many messages and phone calls trying to lobby me not to go to those 10 seats. How can you be going to, how can you be going to Julia Finn's seat in Granville, they told me. She voted against abortion up to birth in 2019. Now, I never said publicly to you guys that Julia Finn voted for abortion up to birth, because she didn't. She's in Granville. She knows the Maronite community, the Muslim community in her electorate would be appalled by that. So I never said she voted for abortion up to birth. But what I did tell you guys is that she's pro-abortion, because she is. She supports abortion up to 22 weeks, which is what she said in her 2019 speech. She said in her 2019 speech, I'm pro-choice, which means she's pro the choice of a woman to kill her baby. Now, just because she doesn't believe in abortion after viability, well, so do most Australians. That's what every reasonable, normal person believes, that you shouldn't kill a baby late in pregnancy. It's only this freak show of, extreme radical politicians in the Labor Party like Minns and Carr and Park who believe that, and, Sharp and Jackson, that you can kill a baby right up until birth and they have no human rights throughout any of it. So I stand by calling Julia Finn pro-abortion, but I never misled people about her voting record. And so that is a clearly defamatory statement right there. And you can go back through all of my videos, all of my reels. And in fact, here's a carousel where I clearly show these are the MPs who were letterboxing who voted for abortion up to birth. And then these are the ones who didn't, but we're still letterboxing their seats.
Because it's just not true. And truth's got to anchor these things. We can have disagreements, but when you're saying an MP has a voting record that they don't share, I just think it's lies.
Even more defamatory, guys. So we'll just say watch this space.
I don't want to give the impression that MPs are trembling in their boots and worried about. They're not. What they've really what they're really, really irritated by is the misrepresentation of their record. And a lot of these votes are difficult, and they have to make a decision on the floor. You get criticised either side by passionate supporters on either side of the issue. They're difficult votes for MPs to make. They take them incredibly seriously. To have someone willfully misrepresent that voting record is incredibly frustrating at the least.
Wow, he's really digging in there, isn't he, guys, on this whole I've lied about their voting records, which have never done. So this is good for the defamation lawsuit, not so good for Chris Minns. But, the bit at the beginning there, it sort of has that flavour of, the lady doth protest too much, when he says, I don't want to give the impression that we're rattled by this. It's just really frustrating that she's lying so much. It's something Julia Finn said where she said, I don't want Joanna Howe to think that she's got to me. If anything, it would have had the opposite effect. But the thing is, guys, they clearly are very rattled by this, or they wouldn't be devoting press conferences to talking about me. They're very rattled indeed. And if you truly want to know what a dishonest person is thinking, you don't listen to what they say, you listen to what they do. And the fact that everyone from Finn to Speakman to Park to Minns, the Premier no less, is spending all of this time trying to take me out, well, that tells you we got to them. So all of this to say, guys, we have achieved a tremendous amount since March 19 when we first learned, way back in March, that Labor and Greens had done this dodgy deal to try and ram this radical bill through before the federal election. We slowed that right down. We gutted the bill. And although it passed today and it may feel like the end, and it has felt like a long 2.5 months campaign, it's been tremendous hard work for all of us, I want you guys to know this is just the start. And up until March 2027, when these guys hit the ballot box and we get to vote, up until that point, our mission is going to be not just to take out Speakman as the leader of the Liberals and to take over that party. It's going to be to educate the electorate on how pro-abortion Labor is and to make sure that we turn some of those marginal seats. We're going to do this together. But for now, that's today on The Dr. Jo Show.